당도 대기 주비하다 동화세기 탑람델라 치 튕기기 돈에 하는 저기 저기 가서 대기 주야다 안에 저기 동화세계 탑람 직수여 같이 난 삼로 주와다지 삼로야 셈 주와다지 하는 저기 대기 주야다 안 동화세 탑람 이외에 안에다 저기做的 해야지 가서 쉬어야지다 저 셈이 돈에 주와다지 안에 탑람디 쉬어야지 주거와 대자다 셈이 돈에 가르스는 셈이야 안에 셈 엠비릭다 셈 상비릭 이외에 안에 셈 엠비릭들이야 안치 니가 셈 엠바셔야지 간지숑도 디 간지숑도 될라테네 엠바 삼 엠바들 길에 깨봐이나 디기 류가기 쪄봐 간지숑도 류가기 쪄봐 될라테네 랑라 녀바다 샬라 녀바 간지 편이 제부 간지숑도 쪄봐 제제 삼다네는 안에 뇌비게 셈 엠바티 안에 지기 될라 라신니가를 녀바 될라테네 류가기 쪄봐 되게 안에 약보 매봐 샬라 뇌비기 라신니가를 녀바도 용유여바도 지나가 삼다 하고 와지 나디네 셈 nembi 도쇼 셈 상보디 삼다 셈 상보 제바이나 안 될라테네 lunga 넘겨 간스 리도 디에네 라셴니가레 펜비 제보 간스 용도 도 신의 제바 제제 안셈 상비 릭디기 안에 lunga 넘겨 야보다 라셴니가라 펜바지 용고요 바인자 안 디니라 하고 와치 장도 신의 심주치 제바지 데니가 하고 요도 데네 안주게 셈 상비 릭디 예직 뻔야다 마게바디기 마게베 탑람 원고제야다 셈상비리디야 게디기디게 안 게바디게야 곰정오 공필로 따야 게메바이나 살도 게하게 탑람시 탑시제 따야 온두시네 제고레스 나가상 저기 나네 쉬야지 디고 쉬루아.
Good morning. So we're continuing to look at this text in the context of us as beings who long for happiness. We're looking at the various methods to achieve happiness, as well as the methods to overcome suffering. And we've seen that generally we can say there are two. There's the general technique in the world of focusing on the exterior, on the material world, in order to achieve happiness, as well as to overcome problems and difficulties. And then there is the focus of the Buddha Dharma, which is on the inner world, on changing our way of thinking. And this is where our focus primarily is as in terms of the Buddha Dharma. Then, to be more specific, what we've been looking at up to now is, if we were to divide our minds, we could say there are those which are virtuous and non-virtuous, or wholesome and unwholesome. And then we need to come to recognize which particular consciousnesses are classified as either wholesome or unwholesome. So we first need to identify the various consciousnesses that arise within us, see what its immediate impact on us is, how it makes us feel. Thereafter, when we express it, how are we expressing it? What kind of physical behavior follows from this way of thinking, and what kind of verbal communication follows from this way of thinking. And thereafter, we look at the impact it has on others, both those who are the recipient of our expression of this way of thinking, as well as the impartial observer. And then lastly, how this is viewed by society. So these are the steps of reflection that we need to go through for both categories of minds, those which are wholesome and unwholesome. And it's through going through this process, repeatedly coming to gain vivid clarity over which minds are wholesome and which are not, which minds are therefore beneficial and which are not, and why they are said to be beneficial or not, how it makes us feel, the impact it has on others, and so forth. And the more we reflect on this, and the greater the degree of certainty that we attain, the deeper the inner strength will be within us to transform our way of thinking, and transform our way of thinking at all times, not just when life is a little easier or our mind is quiet, but at all times. In other words, the more we reflect on this, the greater our skill will be at transforming our way of thinking through the commitment to taking responsibility for our own minds.
어디네 자 지당 저기 지된나 아니 저게 비네 아주 수볼이야 펜비게 칼라 네 리카르카르 용구여베 네비 리카르카르 용구여베 땅아 저기 하고 말와 저 천직 바당 멤버 캐바당 아니 지 천직 호랑 저기 칼라가 바제바제 어디 디사바나 수볼에 펜야 디핀 나즈디 용구마 디기 펜기레사다 디사바나 수볼에 뉴기레사다 두스네 칼라이 야와 이체 안데 안지게 나자 모양의 그 몽골이야 칼라든지 사바이나 나지디 용구 말에 나자 까그리에 사다 안데니게 두스네 코로나주기 심주체 제바체 제상무의 내 수익이 뭐네 칼라든지 사바는 수불에 뭐네라 팽기 여바다 데네 사바는 뉴기 여바다 건주기 제바체 세보하고 하세 안 미말야 잡라탄 거로와 칼라딘에서 최den데네 지고래서 하다 안지기 류젤 마소나 류제디네 세바네 수볼에 팽기레 데네 마제바네 안 지간주 수볼에 뉴기에서 데네기 심주 제한주 심주 제제 코로나적이 하고 하네 냠뇨 토네 두시네 아나가서 미말야 안지게 세세세 정아서 미망기 콘주셰바들의 이시제제 안에 지게 안디 제소 자장아서 칼라사자 사야다 안에 세주대 류지기 토네제야다 안도디 망고지든 지거로와 가시게다 델야 안에 이시 마제바당 안도나 마제바 토네 안가지고 지게 칼라 뇌만에 삼마다 가지고 마주 사지 수분돼야다 나서 몽볼이야다 안에 류제 토네 마제바제 되니 류제 마제바자 디 토네 안가 수볼이야 안지기 나네 나서 몽모요하다 디네 요하디 마주 지디나 세우 차고로 와다 세우로 와다가 통쇼스기 봐 차대로
This approach that is being laid out here is not entirely revolutionary in the world, in that this is the approach that we take in the world, even in the outer material world. For example, if we think about the field of nutrition, we have some understanding of what food types are nutritious and which are not. And that understanding has come about in dependence on scientists analyzing various food types, investigating them, and seeing what the effects are of consuming them. Are they beneficial or are they harmful? Are they beneficial in all circumstances or only some? Are they only harmful in conjunction with other food types, and so forth? And knowledge that has been acquired, and has been acquired in dependence on investigation. Then that knowledge is shared, and the populace then, coming to gather that knowledge, then also goes through a process of thinking about it, investigating for themselves. Is what I'm hearing, or what I'm hearing from nutritionists, does this make sense based on my own experience or not? And where the advice that has been received matches precisely our experience, we'll readily turn away from eating that type of food type because we know it makes us ill. In other circumstances where we have some doubt, we're not entirely sure, we perhaps see a particular food type as not being harmful or being pleasurable, whilst we hear the advice that's given, because it hasn't yet matched our experience, we will struggle to turn away from the advice that has been given, or to follow the advice that has been given, to turn away from those food types. Here what is required is we need to investigate further for ourselves to deeper levels, to come to see whether our experience matches the advice of the nutritionists or not. And this may take more time, especially if the results aren't readily apparent, if one doesn't immediately have a reaction, and rather the advice is this is a problem over the long term. So here we need to look closer because our own experience won't so easily match. So this process that I've just used, this very ordinary experience of nutrition, is the same technique that is used here, but not to do with the outer world, but to do with our way of thinking, with to transform our unwholesome minds into wholesome minds.
semgi tone ane jiga sem sangan sem yaga kandise, dua kandise, sangpo de kandise, sem ngamba kandise, sem ki pa jeba yewa cheya dang. Di jeba ina sem ngamba di peju tangwa ina nga zo liya kanga yoba yo, dada kanga mongoba na kanga yoba, rashi nika la kanga yungu yoba dang. Sem sangpo di nyamlen che di ya ngu nu peju tang, nga zo nipa gongpe du jeba ina, rashi nika la pando yoba di, Temba sanye chumden de dangbo khorang sanye re yo ma nganzu nashi re yo re. Chizang khorang ki lobjong che judu, che de nyamnyo sabu, che cheba sem nala, samlo nala, samlo tang yuwa tang cheba judu, se nyamnyo sa che. Tene khorang ki gyun chazang pang, tene yunden chazang toya, cha gyun gunsi, yunden gunden cha khorang sanye ko khang tosa. Chizang di na, de memba tang, dadi tsirigaba kheba nashin, kala dadi seju tenya ko laba nashin, tene sanye chumden de ki, 그런게 냠용어 토네 삼로 데니시다나 나서 차상다 강아 지기도 삼로 데니시다나 나서 차상다 디기 두구도 줍투구도 세상 차상 디기 고고래 누가 고고 말에 세상 누가 세타네 데네세 삼로 배셔 다제 소교 다제 누가 세고 디기 두구도 세 상지 좀된 디기 롭된 나요 와다 최망고 송여라디 저 상지 좀된 디기 송여게 최디기 차상 망제 샘교어 다에게 뜬나래 송거래 답람디리 세상 데네 요송바 될 때네 상예 줌네 요송바 될 때에 안 퇴삼 제제 될야 제수 이체제 상예 줌네 제수장 상예 줌네 이게 롭종 데네 섬 땅고바 나 럽던 제바 나신 롭종 제 냠네 제되게 망보 상예 고방 톱사레 장주세바 망보 차사레 데네게 망보 차 데네 조디여 봐 땅 알아서 다데 바르도 사데 바디 데네 상예 줌네 이게 롭던 제샤바 될야 아니 지게 제수 주제 가지고 롭종 시야기 고갑대 야고 말아베기 끼엔제 데네게 끼엔제 두스지나 가지고 두스 하도요 그러다 지상 가지고 야 내수디게 하고 두고 말와
That same process we need to apply here now to our inner world. Buddha Shakyamuni presented very clearly which minds are virtuous or wholesome and need to be cultivated, which are non-virtuous or unwholesome and need to be abandoned. So this you would have all heard many times. But we need to go beyond just the mere gathering of intellectual knowledge, and we need to take the knowledge that we have gathered and are gathering and investigate it, coming to see for ourselves whether it's true or not. And again, coming to see that it's true, but at a mere superficial level, this will not lead to a transformation of our way of thinking. It will not lead to a transformation of our habitual ways of thinking. We need to go to a deeper level, where based on our own experience, we see that it's valid. We see that a particular mind, when it arises, how it makes us feel. We see how we express that mind when it's dominating within us, and the impact that that expression has on others, and so forth, as mentioned before. And this then falls into the short-term results of, or the short-term impacts of coming under the influence of such a mind, and then that we see in terms of both self and other. Then we also need to consider the long-term results. And here, again, we need to rely on what Buddha Shakyamuni taught. The long-term results would refer to the karmic results that we will experience in our future lives. So, investigating our various consciousnesses in terms of the short-term impact on ourselves and others, as well as the long-term impact in lives yet to come, we will then develop a stronger inner conviction about which minds are beneficial for ourselves and others, and we need to develop them and ensure that they stay our inner guides, stay dominant within us. And the other class of minds, when we are aware of their arisal, we'll have a deeper inner conviction to turn away from them, not allow them to arise and dominate us. And this then gives us the courage to transform ourselves. So we take knowledge here, and based on this knowledge that we've now reflected on, it becomes much easier for us to turn away from harmful habitual patterns and embrace virtuous, beneficial habitual patterns. And this whole process that I've identified now, this is the primary topic of the Buddha Dharma. of all the many teachings Buddha Shakyamuni gave and that have been commented on over the centuries, this is the primary purpose, for beings to gain knowledge and then experience of that knowledge and transform their way of thinking. And to the degree that one does this and starts to experience ourselves as quite a different person from before, starting to see that we are changing, we are becoming the person we long to be, joy arises within us. We rejoice at our great good fortune. We rejoice in the experience we are gaining in the validity of the Buddha's path, of the Buddha Dharma, through seeing our own transformation. We rejoice in the recognition that we are walking the same path that all Buddhas have walked to perfection. We rejoice in this opportunity we have, and we commit with ease to using what remains of this precious opportunity to its fullest potential.
Denigi sem samlo sangbochkina dele dene debu lunga namgyu dene dele debu de yungresede sem sangbochena di lunga namgyu dene dele debu de yungresede koyunguyni su chara sanjibada jibarwada ko gyu dene chi sabane debu dene yungre dele dene de yungresede nga zo jidang chi yungoi bigyo sukjian ya jebacheya gi denigi zejo dene dumna dene chagre dene namlo purtugure sal jutugure 다른 뭐 통도그래 생각이 쉬고 제바제 두치네 무인의 수기 톤에 라트 연구로 와 디나신 아주 샘기 톨이야 다디 제바제제 지기 데네 삼다나 데네 연구래 데네 삼다나 데네 용 디제부 데네 연구래서 두스tam바 데네 제게서디 샘기 톤도 제바제디 아주 근데 산유 점내기 순고디 무인이서 튜바레 호 최기고 시나마 최케레나 말레나 차상기디 제바체다 하고 고야디 계치모 쉬우샤고 샘성비리티 아니 데레지나 아니 데보 카르카르 용구레 샘성 맹비리 계바나 데레데네 데보 카르카르 용구레 디니스 무인이스디 무인이스 차디 최케레나메나 차상가 하고 고바이나 아니 차상 미징아주 차상한테 대화되보다 둥어 미도바 지번자 디 삼르타나에 토네 디기줍타다 둥하게 세타다 하고 바이나 아주기 최비기지 말다면 술리나 고야샤고 와 베지당 고야차디 뭐니 차고 빼는가서 남주로지 모자로시네 디 최기지 말 수이나 최케레나 멜레나 수이나 베지당쇼고 와 안디나시 아주 샘기 토네 샘상한기 토네 디루세다 디기줍야디 아주게 수이나 베지당초에 차고래
The approach of the Buddha Dharma and the approach that I have just outlined here, this is in accordance with what is done in the world. It's not a process based on blind dogma or on ideology. It's not a process of mere guessing or blind faith, but it's one of using wisdom and reasoning and analysis. Because what we're trying to do here is to develop our reasoning, to transform our way of thinking, not to merely be self-disciplined and I won't do this because I've been told it's wrong, but to give rise to the clear understanding of why it is harmful and why we don't want to therefore experience the suffering results that will follow. So here we're developing our wisdom, our understanding, so that it becomes in accordance with reality. Because where our behavior brings harm is because our way of thinking is mistaken. It is not in accordance with reality. To the extent our way of thinking is mistaken and not in accordance with reality, harm will follow. To the extent that our way of thinking is in accordance with reality, we will develop virtue. We will experience happiness. So because this is based on reasoning, first gathering knowledge, and whilst gathering that knowledge, investigating, analyzing that knowledge. Because this is the technique, the transformation of our way of thinking is within our own hands. It's our own responsibility, and it's something we all can do. It's not something that's exclusive to particular groups in society. One doesn't need to be a Buddhist or not. It's kind of like driving a car. When you know how to drive a car, anyone can utilize that car. So this way of this approach of Buddhism can be likened to the vehicle. And if you know how to drive the vehicle, anyone can do so. So here we're trying to develop wisdom, because it's through wisdom that you gain freedom, that you're no longer clouded by delusion and ignorance.
다 상유 주민은 되게 개바시고 송을 때 가나줄이야 다들 봐도 마신과 하죠. 이제 되니자 나가서 겨울음 책이 다들이야 세베 주와 당타 다 지게 책용용체는 도나닝 보티기마 세베 주와 당타 되게 마가서 디난마다 도수 당고래세지 도송고로와 당한줄이야.
Buddhist Shakyamuni taught so extensively on this topic, and has been commented on over the centuries by so many great masters. Now here, His Holiness has condensed the key points of the Buddha Dharma, in particular in the context of how to come to realize reality. He's condensed this into this very short 28-page text, and now we have the opportunity to come to gather all the knowledge and skills required to be able to transform our own way of thinking.
지상 여름치에 가르친 거라서는 아주 점리 나려야 지난 강아 먹불리 거래서 지상 강아 릭니두스 강아 릭니 용하대 강아 릭직 그 중위의 투비에 터네 거라신기도 만들려 지레되게 지금 거래서 중화 투여다 되네기 터네 직강아지 리거래서 강아 릭직 미기 수고래서 아주 미수에서 삼로 땅탕을 터네 아니 지금 미수고래서 지상 강아 릭지 미수 지상 아주 저기 근데 중앙 투제 사주밀로 사용 잡야다 되네기 지게 차바자야다 사용 잡야기디 강아디 나중에 샤라삼 세투야 매바치 고라신 거르와 제가 당아서 미수기 지 강아 망고슈도 강아 슈치 망고슈도 다디 미수비 강아디 나서 미세투고래 제가 미세투고 디 가르스네 미수비 강아디 가르 용고르스네 낭삼로 땅탕이 토네 마틱 비견지네 강아 망고슈고래스 제가 되네 강아세야디 난게 삼로 땅탕의 유화땅제 삼로 상초디 상비릭데 삼로 땅바이네 디 강아디 라싱이 세투고래스 제가 아주 미수비 강아 망고슈도 디 파수에 세야디 맞아 삼로 땅제 유화땅제 아주 세고고도 쓰네 여름치기도 그배 미유조 차례직 나야 되는 거다.
His Holiness, who has recognized the wide variety of sufferings that beings experience in the world, he's composed this text to help those who have inclination to this approach to be able to take responsibility for their minds through understanding how they work, and thereby be able to transform them. Because the source of sufferings that beings experience, we can divide in different ways, but another way is to divide it from two. One being the sources of suffering being from the material world, and the other being from sentient beings. But for here, in particular, to deal with the suffering that is experienced from sentient beings, His Holiness is presenting this text so as to enable beings to transform themselves and their way of interacting with the world and with others, and thereby transform their experience of the world.
베네당 저기 미 쇠셰베 강아 망보시릭디 배천 가시 쉬외나 다 점린나래야 안 룸바 가실 베네 마마투 마망 계고로하다 계합 나올래 미튼바 낭투시데 마자야다 안 계합 편준이래 마자지 데니 마도네 미쇠야다 베네 강바 잡셔게디 로망베링이야 미라 망베 강아 잡체 강아 우사랴가 데네 강바 잡셔게디 까르마 지기나랴 도어선 찾아매봐서데 데네 그 데니게다 점린 나래야 마추당 데네 지기 나로로 투베게네 마추 데네게 마추가 강아 망시리고레스 제산디 강아디 고 미즈요레스 미즈네리고레스 그래서 가르치 마데 가르리고레스네 미 삼노 나래야 가르용고레스네 데네 지게 사치 심야게 디케 원치 심야게 텔이야 고고도 셈베 군노 삼로 딩고도 셈베 삼로 디케제 니도나라 안데 마자 안데 사치디게네 샹다기 소수게 제가 산삼티레 하바제 딩이 원긴 셈베 데네 삼다 군롱안 발레어도 안데 지미 제자 천자릭 수에제네 시한리야 뇌비기 두고 뇌비게 삼로 디제반의 천자 되는 미되는 쇠 두고래 강바되는 또 두고래 했으면 되니게 또야게 쇠야게 삼로 군롱을 토네 되니게 천자 막보를 쇠여도 되니 대속이 종료도 거기서 변조도 성구종고라 되네 종어진에 되네 변진 미망고 쇠야다 마자다 되네 강아지 둥도 니 미세베 강아래 해서 그러다.
So much of the harm and destruction that beings experience in the world comes about independent on ways of thinking. So on the one hand, we can put aside those that come from natural disasters, but let's take something like warfare, for example. So warfare where there's such destruction of both life and property, lives that are so valued, property that, or cities, environments that have been built up over centuries, lives and property are destroyed in moments. And all of this comes about due to the way of thinking of those with power. They would have a motivation along the lines of, I want to have dominance over this land, over its resources, over its people. And from this desire to have dominance, they buy weapons, arm their military, and engage in wanton destruction. So from this way of thinking, so much destruction and death follows.
아디나시 다 미즈베가 리치데 가릉고서네 안지 코르유 가족이 코르유를 쪼고스야지 안지 배지 도나고도야라서 바데니게 디직다다 지가젤레 코르유리아 뇌비게 내가 막 오제제 아니 코르유데 뇌용도 아니 니 견제네 안지가도 내나서 용하다 강아먹고 시리고라 지대소게 미기 코르유리 파녀바시 우제도 니 미수고 미수베 강알리고라스.
And similarly with the environmental destruction that the world is experiencing, this too didn't naturally come about, but has come about by motivating intents of business leaders and political leaders. And the result of their way of thinking and resulting behavior is this environmental destruction, which is leading to shortened lifespans, to many illnesses, and a decrease in quality of life. So this too has come about from a way of thinking.
소수기 배지 규벤저 사야 딱 배는 코르유를 쪼고서야 되게 소수기 무이다 규벤저 사야 디장이 하나도 가르 삼고서는 무이시오지 벤저 무이시오지 라바이네 디기 차상 디기 줍투그레선 벽강아 차상 세투그레선 벽 삼로시 용도요 되네 장 무이리아 벤저려 배 차와 숙치 뭐 깨제 디기 아는 하디 고고도 삼제 시한레 뇌면에 삼마다제 코르유디게 쪼고서야다 되네게 벤저 사야 제 천자리 수에지네 시한리아 종바데 되네 무 라야게 디던달이야 종야 두 제어도 디스샤상 꿀로나리아 가르었네 디 시한레 뇌기레선 배상은 매바래 제사 시한리아 잠제 매바 차고래 잠제 매바래 잠제 매비 끼인제네 강아디게 수고도 제사 디 강아미 수베 강아 세라 다 가르 삼당고 그래람나 맞아 삼르 돈에 주어다지 샤리아 잠제 삼당 고래 잠제 오다딩에 디제바나 샤르 뇌기레 샤르 kokanga tigire sebege 샤르 뇌네 디기 말 샤르 디기 구구레 샤르 둥아다나 sembe 삼로 샤르 디기 주나 sembe 삼 잠제 지여바이나 같이 슉체바이나이나 아니 샤르 뇌비기 레하디 지금 말해 샤르 뇌비기 레하디 파사기 지금 말했어 진짜 샤르 뇌비 레하디 맞제바나 다 샤르 뇌비기 샤수에게 천자리도 수고 말해 계시 수에베네 디 아니까서 샹기 뇌비 터널에 베지탄 말했어 잠제 여바이나 디나 잠제 여바나 코리오 찰라다 오데 코리오 찰라 미망고 니기레 샘제 망고 니기레 데 지금 말해 샘비기 삼톤에 디고 용고 말해 제가 디네에서 맞아 밀리아 잠제도 슉 충초도 제가 디네에서 맞아 미차상알이야 잠제기 냠는제 빼마스 게친 보래샤 잠제 냠는 제바 있나 미창매 잠제 냠는데 야고 제투바이나 맞아 미수베 강하디 세투구레스 이게 엄지기 디송고다 저거를 잠제기 냠는 제야데
these vast arrays of suffering that beings experience come about independent on a way of thinking. They are motivated by particular thoughts. These thoughts are most often where someone is wanting to have power or influence and certainly to have wealth, thinking that if they have wealth, that their problems will be overcome, that if to the extent that they have influence, their problems will be overcome. This way of thinking that prioritizes oneself and one's own small group ahead of all others prevents one from having any love or compassion for the vast majority of beings, because one is not regarding the harm that one's behavior brings to others. One doesn't see that as being one doesn't not valuing others. One doesn't consider it a problem if one's behavior causes harm to others. However, those who are loving people, compassionate people, naturally, being loving and compassionate, they value others. They take into account the impact their behavior has on others. And they see the impact that it has on others as being at least as important, if not more important, than the fulfillment of their own wishes. And this is because a person who is loving and compassionate values the welfare of others, wanting others to be happy, wanting others not to suffer, wanting others to have good opportunities in life to be able to also fulfill their own human potential. So someone who's naturally loving and compassionate will not engage in actions that bring about environmental destruction. They will not ignore the results of their behavior. Moreover, they will not engage in behavior without being clear on what the likely results are. So therefore, His Holiness is encouraging people, emphasizing the need to develop within ourselves attitudes of love and compassion.
지산 디니 연장 여름 제 가르쳐서 롭종 제기디 아주 제바제 삼다 롭종 제도 빼마서 계신 분이 아주 디니기 강강 요하데 가세는 고 삼로 나로냐 이 제부 가르 연구에 비게 아니 우연히 수 삼로데 삼로 우연히 수 가르치도 그런 오 가르치도 그 제부 가르가데 연구에 봐 먹어 베기엔지는 아주 내가 막 불리고 그래서 지산 삼로 딜이야 삼로 상보다 디시 시반 가산의 슈반에 삼로 상보세디 당한바세디 뭐 디니기 델레티네 제부카르카르 용구 여보도 제 심주체네 셈리아 자체바 줘바이나 되는 아주 라렌 다이그리스 그래서 약고징아도 제바제도 섬데 약고도 섬에나 어딘가고 우드 좀 그러와 제바제제 니잘라는 닝지고라지 밀리아 닝지고 통구여베네 제 약고직도 제바지네 거 유제 약고 메바 안템보 되고 메바 람상 철라 조시네 디되바 지금 말아 디 먹을 라기로 안디 나시 딩위니서 하 먹어나 배치로라 닝지도 고 템보 람상 차주나 배하고도 드시니 계루고로와 제가 디나시 맞아 삼로들에 상한디기 파로려야 제바제 삼로다 심죽제 디니고에 삼로 상한기 제부카네카르 용바데 오 로려야 자처바 용고래 디니연자 맞아 디니 상배 엠비리티 파파야다 상배리데 냠렌제 돈여기 dumbal리기레스 제가 디니게 상배리 돈여 dumbal레도 야노 삼당여도 데 뉴바 차셔로도 엠비리티 로디 마라슈기 마잠 메바 차루그레스 나 야름치기 발롭 나야 되는 것도 롭던 제디 디는 거래봐.
So I'm presenting this so that you can understand the motivation or where His Holiness is coming from. He's encouraging us, although He's encouraging those who have inclination to study this text, to come to know themselves well, to come to recognize which ways of thinking spontaneously arise within them, which arise with difficulty. Recognize in both of these classes which are virtuous and non-virtuous, and not to just know intellectually, know from a list that one has been taught, but to use analysis to get to know for certain that what is said to be virtuous is so, what is said to be non-virtuous is so. Hence, over the previous sessions, we've looked several times at this meditation, how one first has to identify for oneself what is virtuous or not, and then see if this is the case. When a particular mind arises, how does it make you feel? Does your mind remain peaceful or not? When you express yourself under the influence of this mind, your physical behavior and verbal communication, is it virtuous or not? What's the impact on others directly and indirectly? And society's view of this too. And in this way, we reflect deeper. And in this way, we also transform what could otherwise just be mere intellectual knowledge or a shallow theory that we've just accepted, and rather to transform this intellectual knowledge so that it can transform our way of thinking through this intellectual knowledge so that it can overcome our fundamental confusion. And then we can act in accordance with reality. So again, just to emphasize, this approach is exactly what we use in our everyday life. I mentioned about nutrition earlier, but it's the same with the technique we use when we're going to go shopping. If there's a particular need we have and we need to purchase something to fulfill that need, especially if it's a pricey item we need, we will do some research. We'll make sure that the item we end up buying will fulfill the need that we have, will resolve the issue, and it's of good quality, the price matches the quality that we are buying, and so forth. That's the same process as we're doing here. We're using our intellect, we're analyzing, and we're doing so until we come to a satisfactory conclusion, until we come to the conclusion that we need to come to.
지난 롭정제의 결함직이 롭정제 빼 맛이 기침을했어. 지난 다른 오늘 롭정제의 기침을 해 와가서 지딘비기 나 저기 지소나 삼단에 롭정가제 야가유나 내가 야가라다 가리나 강아서야 둠디 롭정 교육이 내가 되게 라야 깔레카다 근데 내가유나 내가 빼 깔레 자고 쉬고 자고야 돼 내네 지소나 지버와 디나신 결함직이랑 아주 되게 파 나중에 롭정 제가 빼면서 계치 모르겠어. 제가 디네 장한 중에 낭비게 생일 롭정 제디 녀마이는다 보여디 와이나데 야가나로 있나데 공부나라 야변에 단색하다 티슈lum보 공부다 디네게 가시가시 마도 안에 지금 롭정 제 나중에 생일 롭정 제디 요 말에 다 겨울 책갈 롭나는 빼 지금 롭정 제 고디 마진 시신기 미도 제가 롭정 제 고래서 생일이 따고 그래서는 마치 겸책 간난 망보잖아 다양상 공부 아니 공부당 공부 야간하로는 배나로 공부 요새 탐절라 생일로 좀 장고다 이 겨울음 지금 투지 개제래 제가 겨울음 지기 내만은 아니 되게네 생일로 좀 제매가 제가 겨울음 지기 아니 되게 생일 장고래 파로 좀 제규제 땅 계시마 장고 템바 제고서 겨울음 주도 스칼로 나네도 체시된데 나 계시마 아니 계시마 튼사제 두스진로 좀 대대상 야가나레나레 베나레 공부카 같이 체중 간듯이네 내일 생일로 좀 제매나 되네 미주게 공부 차고래 지롭선 매나 되네 통시호 말에 용고 말 되네 인자 여름치게 깔롭 나나 그 나위 되네 생일랍지 롭시야 공부 차산알려다 안디 맞에 랍드라부다 되네 미야다 대가지고 종세바 미마 되네게 생일로 저 제가 망고여야 잠시 깔로 진짜 신고도 롭정 제고도 롭정 마신의 신기미도 마신 바에는 아주 삼단한 신 진짜 또 롭정 제고도 장고도 대제 삼단한 신기래서 되네 롭정 제 최고 롭정 되네 장바 있나 미신다게 최 시라 한번 고하다한 용수라 디스고 고하다 두고 말했어 진짜 마신 바에는 미고 하다 dum되고래서 거 진짜 잠시 배디 그 깔로나 빼면서 잠시 투지기다 항상 자산데 공부하다 안에 가든 잠바다까지 미자나로 랍라카나로야 된 생이디 롭정치 지고를 되었다.
This need to gain knowledge and experience based on that knowledge is very dear to His Holiness's heart. He has been emphasizing it for many years. Because in the past in Tibet, there was a tremendous respect for education and the educated, and the importance of education and getting educated was emphasized. However, it was not at all universally available. Now in exile, His Holiness has made great efforts to transform the Tibetan society so that education which the society has long respected is made available to everyone. So in the past in Tibet, it was only available in particular monasteries or in some monasteries to only certain individuals. And that was it. Through His Holiness' constant repetition of the need for education, now all the monasteries study philosophy in great detail, not just the mere gathering of knowledge, but through debate, coming to deeply understand that knowledge. And he's also ensured that the knowledge of the Buddha Dharma isn't restricted just to the monasteries, but also, for the first time, nuns have complete equal access to education and are becoming exceptionally well educated. And moreover, His Holiness isn't limiting the education in the Buddha Dharma solely to the ordained, but it's now, and has been for many years, the Buddha Dharma is widely studied within the education for the secular education, so within schools. So now throughout the Tibetan community, they have all embraced this emphasis of His Holiness and are fulfilling his wishes that the education of the Buddha Dharma, in particular the philosophy, is available and being engaged in by all. And there's so many reasons why education is important. These I don't need to spend much time on mentioning because you know these from society. If you're educated, this will aid in the types of work that you can get and the quality of work, as well as with a general education, one is less likely to be deceived and taken advantage of others. So there's so many benefits to education, and because of this, His Holiness has emphasized it and ensured that it is now pervades all aspects of Tibetan culture.
And the name as a Yarmchiki, Sendiki Tone, and the Jingazo Dansa, Sendiki Dutene, the Nigga, Sendiki Tone, Lobsang Dorje, Jisa Deneza, and the Denigi, Nangsheta, Nangbe Cheta, Sendiki Nidpa, Jawakatas Yungu, Dini Shimjucia, Jik Pando, Bear Chile, in that Dini Jangos in that, Denigi Dansakanalia, and Sendiki Lobsang Dorje, Jangor, the Jiko Laram Geshe Thubten, that Sendiki Lobsang Dorje, Nimanganjo Kabla, Geshe Thubten Kabla, the Senegal Lobsendi, Yoma, Zuyoma, the Chisu, Zuja, Dasada, Saram Geshe Thubten, Senegal Lobse, Jenny, Dushin, Juja, Dance and Rogo.
And accompanying this emphasis on the need for all aspects of Tibetan society to be educated in the Buddha Dharma, His Holiness has also emphasized the need for all Tibetans, all aspects or categories within Tibetan society to be educated in science as well, and see where the understanding of science can assist the Buddha Dharma and where the Buddha Dharma can assist scientists. So therefore, now throughout Tibetan society, science is studied as well. It's now something that all the monks have to study. It is part of the curriculum, and it's also part of the exams that the Geshe Larampas have to pass as well. So back in my day, then science was only available as a side subject. It certainly wasn't mandatory, and it wasn't available everywhere. So it was not part of the curriculum when I was studying. But now, all monks have to study it, and it is part of their exams as well.
I didn't Dede sim juetap sido da sim sangbo da sim sangan sim ngamba de pa yuje sim sangbo le juetap le ya dede sim juetap zemling di tuanchin dume ne du so dang du je so lo dan chambi tab midawa duma tianjing so ra 제가 셈비 규와 땅탑 셈비 상보 냠비 규와 셈비 상부기 리티 파 냠는 제 규와 땅에 되들라 zemlidel야 뜀바 망부 중요래서 답변에 예수 뜀바다 지금 철로 망부기 뜀바 망부디 처사기에는 셈비 냠바디 파 규제 상부 규와 땅야랴 아니 지게 사제 네 미다와다 안에 지게 뒤수 미다와 아니 미 소소라나게 로당 튠비게 몇바도 튠비 하네 두세 탑란 망고 떼요레스.
Now turning to our text, so to the second paragraph on the second page. Various techniques for transforming the mind have been taught by the many great spiritual guides of the world in accordance with the time, place, and individual mental dispositions of their followers. So here we can think of the great religions in the world, such as Christianity, that their founder teachers, such as Jesus, taught techniques for transforming the mind. And there's some variety in the techniques that were taught, and these varieties are due to the time in human history, as well as the particular environment and the mental dispositions or the karmic predispositions of their followers.
대다기 낭천 낭바 상기 비중도 세다 데네게 뜀바 셈 망보송은 나네 다 뜀바 상기 점네 나바 상기 비게다 뜀바 상기 점네 가르송은 나바 상기 비중도 셈 뒤에 탑수 두마된 유에스 셈 소교다 셈 뒤에게 탑람들이야 망보도 송요레스 이제.
And the text continues. These include many methods for taming the mind that have been taught in the texts of Buddhists. In other words, then, Buddha Shakyamuni himself, just like the other founder teachers of religions, taught many techniques for taming the mind.
지사 당아 저기 셈 gamba들라 직 망보여와 때문에 되차 콘도와 마야 세다 데니게 망보여 이내다 데니게 망보디게 셈 gam바디게 매바 쇠비게 망보 가르스 망고 탑라 망고 순 거르지 내가 매바 쇠야다 데네 내가 매바 쇠야 얘네 자와 사보나 제바 매바 쇠기 직 데니게 망고 순 거르지 탑라 망보 여르세 디송으로.
And Buddha Shakyamuni identified the afflicted minds that torment being so, minds such as attachment, anger, and pride. And then he taught many methods to temporarily overcome these minds. Moreover, he also taught how to completely eradicate them together with their seeds.
데니게 망보 유변에 셈 감바디 가르쳐 되차 콘로 나자 셴고 나에게 삼로 지게 셴년 뇌바시게 삼로 지 망보시 리그로 와다 제수 차상도 가르디 가하는 데 대소야 아직 안 저기 규단 기 매발의 용고 말 규단 기인질에 되네 기고레스 지산 데네 삼랑 감바디게 차상 콘로다 되차다 나자다 데니 릭디기 파 규가를 때 용고레스 파자위 바 제요도 나주길라 다제 마리 파세아들 데니 용고레스 지다 고 나자름치기 아주게 셈 나바다 상보다 용의 매가 쇠야리야 다 자와 코로네 베니 신을 마선 자와도 마제는 유샤바나 아니야게 제요 말와 지산 자와네 제발라 자와도 가와 유마하고 고로와 자와 디레샤스 하모거나 자와 제투야 말 지산 데니게 셈 남바 용서 자와데 가를 용고레스 지산 디 자와디 매바 쇠기 돈달라 다 겨름치기 맞아 야 도르듀시네마 베지 돈다 님보드 마송고 지산 셈 남바디게 간스 용고레스 다디 마보 송보 예베 나네 다시 매바 남바디게 간스 용 자와 가를 용고레스 마디 마 자와디 마 뜬고르 다디마.
Buddha Shakyamuni, when teaching how to both temporarily overcome and completely eradicate these harmful ways of thinking, he pointed out that all harmful minds arise independent on causes and conditions. These need to be identified. So to both temporarily overcome as well as completely eradicate harmful ways of thinking, the causes that lead to their arisal need to be identified. And the root cause of all our afflicted minds, all our destructive emotions, is the ignorance of self-grasping. And this is specifically called the root cause, because just like in agriculture, you know that if you cut a root of a plant, it will not grow again. Likewise, if this one root cause is cut, no other afflicted minds will grow.
当然就本来控制什么单位呢？被米的俺的女生是没米起来控制才学了，但控制起来用的，但控制的可能是来吧的什么心就切的，早晚用手举的可能是用都是的，当波可能那俺子了，当波开始呢，俺这边什么里过的，俺这边俺真去里过的，俺这边什么里过的，第一节里呀，本来的本米起个这个所属的加拉雅古学是吧？加拉雅古的米起个本来所属的毛扎子底下是的，俺就毛扎的里米的去跟那个大子对个出来当员呢，俺就米的来抓人控人个啊。这上地控制的被控制的，干是用过的是俺就心就早晚开始那个是怎么当员的，当不俺说的，俺这边个俺这边俺进去了的是，俺进去了的是。nga sebe nga zile de dine di jele ngi se de nga yoro timbe nga zin ngi tambo nga zin li wor dine ngi se nga yoro timbe nga yoro ngi se aje jina ngi se la bidu ngi moja se aje li wor jisa di ngi moja se tambo nga se samta dine di jele di nga ngi se de ngi moja se li wor dine ngi moja de yo de sambo li wor dine li yo de ngi moja de la kwe chola ta sha se dine shine快点米的了空浪过来，这三个都空来的，说是毛着出来当员呢，这里米的了空来的，什么的看那个是当不啊这边啊是这个送理由嘞，这是今天我这边什么的我有了这边，当不我进去了，今天我是我有了这边了些，今天我毛着是去什么的这，这里要快出来当下是米的出来当下是，今天米的了空浪过来当时空来的地里过来。
The root cause of all suffering is the ignorance of self-grasping. Let's give an illustration then to try and show why this is so. So most of you will have cars, maybe they're parked outside, and if someone damages your car, usually that has an impact on your mind. And usually the impact on your mind is not pleasant, but rather unpleasant. All too often we've seen that people get angry if their car is damaged by someone or something, even if it's only damaged slightly. So why is it? Why is it the damaging of someone's car causes them to get angry? So we say the root cause is the ignorance of self-grasping. So how does the ignorance of self-grasping, how is that the root cause of getting angry when one's car is damaged? Well, we have a sense of self. We grasp at our sense of self as existing in the way that it appears. And because we have a sense of self, a sense of I, that self, that I has a mine. And in this case, the mine is my car. So because there's an I, there is a mine. And then because we have an I, we have the mine, which in this case is the car. When that is then damaged, anger follows. So again, the anger arises in relation to my car. It is only my car because of the sense of I. And then in the other direction, because of the sense of I have mine. In this case, mine is expressed as my car. And then when my car is damaged, I get angry. Different car gets damaged, my response is very different because it's not my car. It's another's car, which too comes from the sense of I.
这上啊，这个控制界的，当不啊这边啊在上面的考，啊就考上对的呢，的呢这边主播啦，可女双啊了女双下去，啊了女双这边个，你这上面当一对，你控制啥这些，啊了女第个啊了女双上去，的你怕控制啥？呀，咱们啊这边上面考些，按第个。我来虐杀的是女有嘛的，毛把的归虐杀的上面，顶我过去的可能空了对呀。然年嘛可我来虐杀啊，当不啊上面可，的呢年嘛我来可虐杀是别的那个是虐杀是别上面的个，的那可空了呀。 제선 당보 저 가래 내가 나저 코로 나와 있는데 내가 가래 집에 나가 섬도 나래 나 세리고라다 칼라 참견로 섬인데다 나 섬도 오다 나 뜻사지들 봐도는 됐어 해야다 기부여라 해서 비게 섬다다 되는신 두고로 제선 가서 나 세배 섬도 당보데 나 세배 섬도 리고래
Because there's a sense of I, there naturally follows the sense of mine. And so we'll have my body, for example. And then if one is feeling ill, I am ill, my body is ill. So because of the sense of I, we identify therefore with the body that is now ill, and we have a particular response. And this starts with the misapprehension of the sense of I. Or, let's say someone speaks to us in an unwanted manner, they're verbally abusive towards us. We have a sense of I, and they being verbally abusive to me. And therefore, we get upset. Our mental reaction is one where a state of peace is lost. Or if we think about someone who has spoken to me in an unwanted manner previously, merely recalling that person leads to a state of unease arising or anger arising. Or thinking about meeting that person again, immediately a tension arises. So all of these mental responses of either a state of tension about someone we may meet, or anger about something someone said to us in the past or is saying to us now, all comes about from this sense of I. There's a sense of I that we are now trying to defend and repulsing who we perceive as someone who potentially has or will harm this I. So in this way, we come to see how the I is the source of suffering. And the sense of I always accompanies us, no matter what we're doing, not just in times of distress. If we're having a nice day with my friends, there is that sense of I. I am having a nice day with my friends. Everything we do, we are always accompanied by the sense of I.
Denege, Chisa, Tambo Nga said, Chisa do Chidi Nga Zulia Nga said, Nga Zuga Lolia, Canis Nangore, Labna, must do something Nga said, Susrang Nga said some of your water, do some Davene, Nga Lolia, Canis Nangore, Labna Ngadi, Chiku, Nga Zugu Pumbo, some lot, dear Mahim Bokoron, Laws, Koron, Yedeba, Pumbo, Denigi, answer some Gaya, Matimba, Koron, when a laws of Dubu, you are listening to Nangore, Lolia, Denis Nangore.
The sense of I that accompanies us everywhere and we're so habituated to. We need to come to recognize how what this is, how our I appears to us. So we're sitting here all quietly in this room together. Take a moment while I'm talking to try and get a feel for your sense of I. So in general, we tend to feel that it's something separate from our aggregates, our physical aggregate, our body, as well as our mental aggregates, our consciousnesses. So we tend to feel as if it's something other than, something different from our physical and mental aggregates.
Zan dine chin nang yore, chin nang wa na xin a zu yore sam chin nang wa na xin zin de hui nang wa na xin ma zu phung bo dang sam lo ka ya ma do khorong wen yo ba nang wa na xin da khara yore sam bi zin ba di nga zu gi le yore di zin ba de le nga zin la ho nga zin nga ra xin ju ba zin ba so nga ra xin ju ba zin ba de le di da nga zu yo mo bo sem nga ba ri ke cha sang de le din gi wo le Dela dene kondo kigore, kondo chasan duecha, kondo ngaja, ma chasan nyomo birik chasan zawa dele dene ligore sete.
So when the sense of I that appears to us, this is an appearance to consciousness. Then another consciousness grasps at it as existing in the way that it appears, grasps that or believes that this is the way the I appears to us is how it exists. So this is a consciousness that is grasping at the self, and we call this self-grasping. The consciousness that grasps at the self is called self-grasping. And it grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears, and the way that it appears is usually called inherently existent or truly existent, or perhaps a clearer expression is naturally existent. So inherently or naturally, it's the same word. So it appears as if it exists from its own side. There's something, and it has its own natural existence. And then a consciousness grasps at it as existing in this way. And then from this grasping at the self as being inherently existent, having its own inherent nature or naturally existent nature, all our afflicted minds of anger and attachment and pride follow. Minds of anger come from trying to protect and defend this sense of self, or attachment to try and fulfill the needs of the self. All of them come from this self-grasping mind.
Di meba syogo enza, da di meba syola kana syogri labyo de da nga zugi di meba syogo ina di zimba na shinchi ko lo nochu rebe lo no mano wa chema jela na ko lo nochu res. Jesa nochu yimba de kare lamna korongi nga se kangla yema phungpo dang kangla yema de korong weni jubdo yoba zimba na ji yorebesin yo mares orda di yo mares. Jesa di meba de 매바디 가서 하고고 말디 하고고 그래. 진짜 디니가 로딩 안 주기 디가 로들이야 삼모하나 딴거 말. 마다면서 로디 노트인 바 하고고 말. 노트마 하 먹어도 로디 매바 쇠기 가서 탑시 딴거 말. 탑시 마다 와서 거 매바 쇠 두고 말. 진짜 디니자 디 로디 매바 쇠고 그래. 디 로디 매바 쇠 바이나 코 자와 매바 쇠 차례. 자와 매바 쇠네 데네 녀모제요 말. 녀모제 매나 셴리야 라신니가라 강아 영하게 되고 말해. 진짜 기디네 대화네 대화마도 동어 영하기네요 말해서 그렇다. 진짜 대화 써야 돼. 인디니 스트럭처에서 그렇다.
The first point, we understand the theory of how the I appears to us, then we need to gain some experience to come to see how the I does appear to us. Then, having heard the theory that it's from how grasping at the I as existing in the way that it appears, all suffering follows, we need to see if this really is the case or not. So just like the illustrations that were given earlier, we first need to identify a mind, we hear if it's wholesome or unwholesome, but we have to investigate to see if this really is the case, not merely accept the dogma, but see whether it's true or not, whether it's correct or valid or not. So this mind that grasps at the I as existing in the way that it appears, is this mind that is doing the grasping, this consciousness that is grasping, is it a valid cognizer or not? Is it mistaken or valid? This we need to see. And how do we recognize that? Well, we see, does the object exist in the way that it appears or not? So we need to investigate whether, having come to understand how the I or the self appears, we need to investigate, is that appearance in accordance with reality or not? Does the object, the self, exist in the way that it appears or not? And when we investigate and we come to the conclusion that the I, the self, does not exist in the way that appears, that the way that it appears is not in accordance with reality, we then know that the mind that is grasping at it as existing in this way is a wrong consciousness. It's an ignorance. And because it's a wrong consciousness, it can be eliminated. It can be eliminated through developing the contrary consciousness. And that means there is possibility to gain freedom from suffering. There is possibility through the elimination of this self-grasping, which is a mind of ignorance, through eliminating it, freedom from all the suffering that results from it can be attained. And through the elimination of ignorance, lasting stable happiness can be attained.
Meba rebes meba mare ngase yorwa da nga yore ta ko ni ngoi ni so gan si yore la ne phumbo dang lui phalo la ma tyen ba korong ngoni duba yore bes di yo mares jisan korong phumbo dang lo gang chi phal lui phumbo dang phol lo pha tyen ne sha ba chi ma do lo dang phumbo dang la ma tyen ba rang ngoni duba di tong ba res jisan deni ge rang ngoni duba tong ba de la tong san chi de ya tong ba ni la gores tong ba ni la gores Di how go away you said you load down Gala Rangoni Jubadi Zawajini Mindua Sample how go can load della Tomba to Lola Gores, just a tomba to be Tawas, tomba to Lola Gores, just a ding and Jugi Nesuting as a Shingo or as a Diku how go resure.
So we're just in brief going through the meditation process, all the steps outlining them. So when one comes to the point where one recognizes that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, and therefore the consciousness that grasps at the self as if it did exist in the way that it appears, that consciousness is a wrong consciousness and therefore an ignorance, we then will naturally think to ourselves, well, if the self does not exist in the way that it appears, does the self exist at all? Am I non-existent? And then here, the last step of the meditation is to recognize that it's not that the self or the I doesn't exist at all. It's rather that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. How it does exist is as a mere imputation by mind onto the basis of the aggregates, the physical and mental aggregates. That way we can say the self exists. But it doesn't exist in the way that it appears to us as being inherently existent or naturally existent or self-existent. It is rather empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing inherently. It's empty of existing by its own nature. This is the understanding of emptiness. And the mind that understands emptiness is a mind of wisdom, a mind that is contrary to the ignorance of self-grasping. This mind of wisdom is the wisdom that realizes emptiness, and it is in accordance with reality. The wisdom that realizes emptiness realizes that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, as inherent or by its own nature, but is empty of existing in that way, but rather the self exists merely or only as an imputation by mind onto the aggregates.
Di lo di ki gomba la gom che de nga to nyomo ba meba sene ma do shen nyomo ba meba su tu go ma zo ko nyomo me meba ngo su meba sue gi da chul ma so na ngo so kam ju de chawa di ro zhe di ro che sa di na shi ko nyomo ba sa chawa ne meba sue gen di da dong ba ni to ba da wa de di gom go re di gom che ne dang bo dong ba ni ne jie ba che 간에 두세 제바지 심주제 되는 동반이다 하고 요도 동반이도 따와도 끼어도 되는 될이야 곰치네야 니지 야네 곰치 누바처처 따진 된 디다도 녀모바데 자원에 집은 매가 방투고 제산 방투고 제자 디고 고래 예제다 동반이 따와도 고래 곰고래 지래
We need to come to understand with vivid clarity what is meant by emptiness in order to be able to give rise to the wisdom that realizes emptiness. And this is an important sentence because we need to understand emptiness. This means we need to gain an intellectual understanding of the topic in order to be able to realize it. But merely understanding emptiness is insufficient. We have to realize it. And the reason that we have to realize emptiness is because it's only the realization of emptiness that actually cuts the ignorance of self-grasping. The mere intellectual understanding, that, whilst it can have an impact on us, will not, though, the mere understanding will not lead to the severing of the root of ignorance. We have to realize it. We have to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness. And this only comes about in dependence on understanding emptiness. So therefore we need to do these two. Gather knowledge, so hear, and reflect, meditate on the knowledge that we are gathering. And in this way, we will transform potentially a shallow intellectual insight, firstly then into a deeply felt conviction, and then into direct experience.
Tongba ni tayu ko chungse chena deni zada yaram che delia zo sunye ta delia an tongba ni ko ya dor du shi ba sung yin se wo de tongba ni tayu ko chungse chena.
The paragraph in the text concludes, from amongst these, a little will be said here about the view of emptiness. So amongst these various methods for taming the mind that have been taught in the text of Buddhists, His Holiness here is going to write a little bit on the view of emptiness.
Dami pe tawa ten la se do da nangba la ji de jara mawa tang do de ba se tang de ni ge ne sem zam ba se tang de ni ge yung go re ji sa de chapa chen bo la ya ne ji ge do dang ma se go re ne ya chapa nian tue da rang jia da jian shu sem jian shu lam nyam ne de ji sa ya den de ya dami pe nam sha sung go re se dami ba ten la dami pe tawa se de ji sa dami pe tawa gong go re se sung go re che le.
And the text continues. Views of selflessness are taught in both Buddhist vehicles, the Theravada and the Mahayana, and with respect to the Mahayana in both Sutra and Tantra. So in brief, the meaning here is, however one divides the teachings of the Buddha, selflessness is presented. So whether it's in any of the philosophical tenets, such as the Vibhashika, the Sautantika, or the Chittamatra, a presentation of selflessness is given. Whether one is training in the lineage of practice of a hero, or the lineage of practice of a solitary realizer, or the lineage of practice of a bodhisattva, a view of selflessness is presented. And again, however the Buddha Dharma is divided, selflessness is presented.
지규 차상 투모 지규를 숨고래서 다음에 배다고 공고래서 해야 돼. 차상을 숨고 지규를 해서 자 투모래서 이내 다음에 배다와 디나려야 차라 림바 먹고 용거래서 다 지규를 다음에 배다와 공고래서 숨나 지규를 돼. 이내 다음에 배다와 나려야 차라 먹고 요래서 나서려.
So the first key point here is that the view of selflessness is presented in whichever division of the Buddha Dharma one chooses to look. So there is a general presentation that one can say that pervades the Buddha Dharma. That being said, though, there is a variety in terms of degrees of subtlety that the view of selflessness was taught.
저기 밀리아 디치바로 변해가 좀 미차상 조도바나 칼라사고래서지 차상 지규로 와다. 근데 지예미나다 저기 편이 지게 에시미나다 베바이나서는 조도나 칼라사고래서 그러와. 근데 지규로 와. 나 이제 칼라사나들에 미도마고로 와. 아니 가시게 체마가 사고래서. 아니 제다 just 뉴유마 제요 말사다. 가시려 어디 체 뉴유는 제다 지 발레다 just 망아서 가시 발레 망아 사고래서. 근데 지 가장 조도나 칼라사고래서디 지구를 차상 지발에 이나디 칼라 사탄된 나 칼라나리아 주 체쇼다 수보리아 판도 체쇼야다 that's 칼라 사탄 가시기니 지 주첨부 수보레 마녀바 펜베기 주첨부의 먹보사고라 가시네 아니 지기 조자의 수보레 주첨부 샤면나 조자의 자가점대 상고 가시데도 뇌마녀마서 사야라는 지디가 사디가 책으로 디나시 칼라스 조도나 칼라스 하고레스데 송타 지바레데 이네 사고바 지바레 이네 디나리아 칼라스 사단들이야 림범미도 먹고요로와 야울레다 주체쇼다 공체쇼다 먹고요로와 디나시 다 저기 동아다 디네기 차바치 차사이나 다음에 뱉다고 공고리에 세디 공고와 직부 지구르디나 다음에 뱉다와 나리아 나 토림 망보용 거래세래
Similarly, all sentient beings, when we are hungry, we eat something. So in general, we can say, when a sentient being is hungry, they eat. So, but what is eaten? There we see the variety. So some humans much prefer rice, and they'll make sure that's dominant in their dish. Others aren't so keen on rice, and they'll rather have bread with their meals. That's their preference. And others say, well, I want to have at least half a plate full of vegetables. And so we see a variation in preference. Or another way to express it, some are very concerned about nutrition. And whilst they need to eat like everyone, they will make sure that what they eat is nutritious. Others don't care, and they'll eat whatever they can get. So here we see, in general, when beings are hungry, they eat. What is eaten? Here there's tremendous variety. Similarly then, in the Buddha Dharma, a view of selflessness, it needs to be cultivated. So whichever lineage of practice one is engaged in, whether divided in terms of the particular objective, the goal of a hero, solitary realizer, or bodhisattva, or in terms of a philosophical tenet, then the view of selflessness needs to be cultivated, is what a student will hear. But in terms of the degree of subtlety of that presentation of selflessness, there is variety.
다디 저 칼라 사다들이야 미 지게 변조를 체다 야가디 변조 야가 유게 되게 칼라 수볼에 패다 주시에 공체 되사고로 대 변조 시라면 딩딩이나 딩딩 사고로 변조 시라면 교고 쉬고르지네 사야지라는 지고 뇌만 기쇼마 호 사야산 지고로 와 사고로 디 칼라 야도 세디 퇴바다 주체를 세디 미 변조 유칸을 라레로 와다 변조 가제 야가요네 미 야가사 딩여나 딩여나 배제 교우이나 된지 칼라 교사들 뭐도 지과로와 디나시 다음에 뱉다고 고메들이야 미 냠는 제가 원보 랍딩 타수용 거래 원보 랍디기 다음에 뱉다와 참어디기 터셔디 곰투고 거래 원보 딩디기 다음에 뱉다와 딩고면다 되니게 다 원보 마셔디기 다음에 뱉다와 나네 뜻 고미야디 차고래 제가 디니기 네고 다음에 따오 고미 나래 디림바 케바 요아디 가르스네 냠는 지간 강사라 차라 림바 원보 잡딩 타수미 요바 인자 콘솔리아 벤 미교오시고 제베네 칼라 주시 뭐 공치면서 통바로와 디나시 원보 교오르시나 타마디네 고 다음에 따와 아니 터쇼디 검투 가고 지기로 안디나 지바 차고래.
And a similar analogy to make the point is, those who are wealthy will have a very different diet from those who are impoverished. And in between, those of average wealth will also have a diet that differs from those who are wealthy and those who are impoverished. So similarly, in dependence on, maybe we can say, the intellectual inclination of beings, beings will be drawn and engage in differing presentations of selflessness. Some who are more inclined to a subtler approach will be drawn to that subtler approach, which tends to be more intellectually vigorous. And then there'll be those who are not so drawn to such a presentation, who are drawn more to a coarser, a simpler presentation. And for their inclination, that will be sufficient for where they are now. And then there'll be varying presentations for those in between as well.
아디네 다 지난기 개발 주비 제체 점조 예매당 세도다 저기 낭바다 낭바 마인베게다 당아주 점리 나래야 베네 이슈출로 아니 가시다 힌두다 낭바스 먹고 여반사다 저기 당아주 낭바다 낭바 마인바세디 개발 간에 치고래 라비오도 내려야 아니 아주 주비기 개발 제바이나 아니 낭바세디 간에 샤워스네 jamru kheling hendela azu nangbache ta jamru khemeleng hendela mede kasa nangba mayin ba se odus ken kyabachi ge yejere.
In returning to the text, when a Buddhist and a non-Buddhist are differentiated by way of behavior, the difference is whether or not the person takes refuge in the three jewels. So when we divide beings in terms of the religion that they follow, if someone is to be considered a Buddhist or not, this depends on whether they take refuge in the three jewels or not. And this way of classifying is in terms of their behavior or their conduct.
지담이 데데 이슈 다 네카시 다 힌두이나 호랑도 겹치 겹 켈링고로 와 네콘조 켈링고로 와 당하는 저기 낭비 점로 세대 가르치 오르스네 권 점로들 콘조들 숨묘리다 숨마도 샤고 말에 숨레 마와 샤고 말에 숨레 뉴아 샤고 말에 숨 인지미주 숨 샤고래 제가 숨 참고고래 제가 숨마 니마도 메나 켈렘바나 낭비기 점로 차고 말에 제가 낭비 점로들 접수 조에 유들라 곤초들라 숨샤고래 제가 숨 되네게 숨 될야 이식이 대바치 핸디 다 낭바래서 그래 되네게 마인바디다 낭바 말해서 낭바 남 마인비 개발되지 시고래 점로 써야 돼. Then that the job of the Tawas Dame Namshako Shihiurva, Chizadati, Lujuko, Chasawa, you were just a DJB church, Tawi Namshakishima, you the Tawala, you Dame, the Kishi, Chevache, the Tawas. Dameba, Maimbi, you Shandala, Nichigi, Chevache, Lodilia, Jevasiva, Chizadini and Zada, DJB church, you do. Capsu Udele, Capsumle, Laba Meba, Capsum Masawa Meba, then they Capsumlea, Capsu Ishi, the Debachi Hindida, Navas, Shagorva.
Whether someone has refuge or not is dependent on whether they're turning towards the three jewels for refuge or not. Such a person would be considered a Buddhist. But in other religions, people may have refuge, but they would turn to the objects of refuge relevant to their own religion. So, in terms of their behavior, they would turn to the objects of religion the objects of refuge of their particular religion. Those who are Buddhists, they turn towards the three jewels as being the objects of refuge, and refuge here meaning protection. So for protection from suffering, a Buddhist turns towards the three jewels and the three jewels alone. The three jewels are definite in number. They aren't less, they can't be more. They are always the three jewels. And it's to them that a Buddhist turns to for protection from suffering or for refuge.
제사당 아주 겹숨 자에다 지당 경주 마가치기 킹거야 아직 야 가시게 대단이다 사발에 되어 있는데 마신 거 지금 그러와 지다 디네자 겹숨세데 겹된 법보 상예 권초사지제 디네 겹무에 최권초사지 디네 겹주베 다로 기준 권초사 디숨 참고 디숨 대 겹숨시고랑 저기다 상예 권초 최권초 기준 권초 숨버들 겹숨 될야 대바지 이시제지도 제되게 제바이나 당아서 남바세다 on this urva.
So I'm sure most of you will be very familiar with the presentation on refuge, but just in brief, for those who are new, the three jewels refer to the Buddha, the Dharma, his teachings, and the Sangha. So these are the three jewels. The Buddha is the founder teacher, the teacher of Buddhism. The Dharma is his teachings, and it is the actual refuge. And the Sangha are one's companions, those who assist one in cultivating the Dharma within oneself. When one turns to these three jewels with with a mind of faith or trust or conviction, then one has refuge in the three jewels, because one is turning to them for protection from suffering.
다디 멤버 디기 네바 디기 나서 자야게 된다라 면지 제도 면지 사는 나서 자르고로 지제 면 나신디 최고 조사들이스 세상 알아줄이야 탑람 다디 딘디딘 냠는 디시 맞아 셈 교화다야스도 셈 상보다 멤버디 파 교화딘이 땅으로 삼라딘이 땅 딘이 공고로 롭된 지겐데 사유권 지고 롭된 지인 거래 뭐 그런 냠뇨 도네 내가 둘럽된 지 제사 딘이기 롭된 지기 최디 아주 냠는 지기 최디 최권 조디 반 맨나시리에세 다 기능 고조세디 멤비기 매요나시 제사 매 뒤세 따다 제야다 딘딘딘 코 따세 갑갑리야 코 나지데 야게 조우데 조금도 간에 마두도 야르도 제바 체인지로 매시 디나시디 기능 고조래 아주 넘긴 따도 지신 아주리야 지게 냠는 제 야게 땅한디 기능 고조래 제사 디네자 네바실레 네바다라 멤버 캐바지고도 제사 면 데네기 면야고 고고래 멤버 연나 면메나 내즈다도 말해 제사 멤버야고 고고래 데네 면야고 고고래 다 데려야 면다면 이거 여바나 데려한 지 나도 네바들라 따도 지가 야고 고고래 제사 디숨 참고 디숨 참바나 내가 네바들이야 더 고해기 튕기네 차도여와 제사 네바 자야래 튕기 차도여와 온디나시 나주 동아들에 세제 셈간비 리트 바 빵체 상비 리트 계제 아주 타르침발라 데네 아주리아 아주 람된 지hen 뜀버보치 겹 뜀버보치 고고래 뜀칸 만노 뜀칸지 고래 대산 요건죠 데네 뜀어디 안델이야 냠는 지에게 최주 고고래 제가 최 만노와 약보고 디 냠는 지도 아주 강하세요 데네기다 냠는 지야로 로봇이 행하줄이야 로봇이 가지고 고고라디 기능 거죠 제가 디숨디 산요건지 최고지 기능 거죠 써야 되는 저 낭비기다 겹들 인지미지 숨 샤고야디 숨 샤고 김새로 된 샤고래
The way to approach a topic of refuge is as seeing oneself as a patient, someone who's ill. Because just like in life, when one is ill, one goes to a doctor, and one won't go to any old doctor. One will go to one that is skilled in the particular field that relates to the illness one is experiencing. So in this analogy, the skilled doctor is the Buddha. The skilled doctor then will be able to successfully identify our illness and its causes, and will thereby prescribe medical treatment. And that medical treatment is likened to the Dharma here, giving us knowledge as well as encouragement and explanation on how to meditate on that knowledge. And then the doctor will give further advice along the lines of when the medication should be taken, how it should be taken, what are the adverse effects that could be experienced, and what to do if one does experience them, etc. And this we can here liken to the Sangha, the third jewel, who are one's companions. So in this process, if one doesn't go to a skilled doctor, one will not get correctly diagnosed, and therefore the treatment is not ultimately going to be effective. One needs to go to a skilled doctor so as to receive the correct diagnosis and treatment, and then one needs good advice in terms of how to apply that treatment in our everyday life. So all three of those are required. So similarly, In our context here, one goes for refuge. A synonym for refuge is to go, instead of going for refuge, you can say go for protection. One goes for protection from suffering. This means one goes to a skilled teacher who can teach the unmistaken path to freedom from suffering. And that's the Buddha. The Buddha is able to teach an unmistaken path to freedom based on his own knowledge and experience. And that imparting of knowledge and experience is the second jewel, that of the Dharma. And these are the teachings to cultivate within oneself in order to gain actual freedom from suffering. This is why the Dharma jewel is called the actual refuge, because it's through cultivating the Dharma in our own minds that freedom from suffering is attained, that refuge, in that sense, is attained. And then thirdly, the Sangha jewel are our companions on our journey to the attainment of freedom. So these three jewels are definite. They aren't sometimes less or sometimes more. Then the next point, when they are differentiated by way of view. So when Buddhists and non-Buddhists are differentiated by way of view, the difference is whether or not the person asserts the views which are the four seals, testifying to a doctrines being the word of the Buddha. So in the previous segment, we saw how people are differentiated in terms by way of behavior as to whether they are Buddhist or non-Buddhist. Now in terms of view, it's as to whether they assert the four seals as testifying to a doctrines being the word of the Buddha or not. You see, then there are two ways to differentiate whether someone's a Buddhist or not, that relating to behavior and that relating to view. But of the two in general, it depends on behavior as to the first point, as to whether someone is suitable to be considered a Buddhist, whether they go to the three jewels or not for refuge, for protection from suffering. And the reason for saying that in general, the way that one can be identified as Buddhist or not is in terms of the first point, that of behavior, as to whether someone goes to refuge to the three jewels or not, is because the second point would, if that were primary, it would actually end up excluding some Buddhists. Because many Buddhists, they take refuge in the three jewels and they will do so with sincerity, but they will not have an understanding of Buddhist philosophy. And not having an understanding of Buddhist philosophy will mean one will not go to refuge in terms of one's view. Those who do will understand philosophy in terms of the varying philosophical schools. Then they will have a philosophical view that is in accordance with the four seals. But one can still be a Buddhist in terms of conduct, but not in terms of view.
다디 마 남윤 지단이 되셔야 지다다 낭비 줌다 마we 가사 인민세 간에 지기를 라도다 낭바 있나 낭비 줌다 마we 인고야 마다 그래서 낭비 줌다 마we 인민데 다와까자시 켈림비게 가사 있는 낭비 줌다 마we 가사리에서 다와자게 따가다시 찾아 켈링 시디 켈링이 매바이나 다 낭비 줌다 마we 가사 말했어 그 낭바 있나 낭비 줌다 마we 가사 말했어 저 낭비 줌다 마we 제라 마와 되대바 샘자바 우마바시 디나디루와 지사 다와까다 차게시 켈림바이나 야나 제라마와 차게라 야나 되대바 차게라 야나 샘자 야나 우마바 차로 그러와 세상다 간주기 낭바 있나 제라마와도 되대바다 샘자바 우마바 인고해요 말해와 지사 되니 이제 점권주스면 껴수도 점로 여바나 낭바 차고 그래 낭비 줌다 마웨 차로 그래 디디 인고 낭바와 낭바에도 점로 유면다 냠비 줌다 차 다가지로 된다지 점로 여기 낭바 있나 다와까다기 차게지 케림비기 낭바 줌다 마웨 가사 인고 말해 다 낭비 줌다 마웨 가사 있는 낭바 이메 파 잡세 디디 차고로 춤 디죠.
This could also be expressed slightly differently. So in terms of those who go for refuge to the three jewels, in terms of they are Buddhists in terms of their conduct, within this group there will be those who also can be differentiated by way of view as being a Buddhist, and those who do not fulfill this criteria because they do not know Buddhist philosophy. So in other words, if one is considered a Buddhist because one accepts the four seals, one will also, so the second criteria, one will also accept the first criteria, one will go for refuge to the three jewels. But it doesn't necessarily follow that someone who goes for refuge to the three jewels, the first criteria, will also fulfill the second criteria, that of accepting the four seals. They may or may not. So there is that difference. But someone who does accept the four seals, they will be suitable to be called not only a Buddhist, but a propounder of Buddhist philosophy. And they will then be further classified in terms of one of the four Buddhist philosophical schools, that of the Bhabbashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, or the Madhyamaka. So, someone who accepts the four seals is in addition to being a Buddhist, because they go for refuge to the three jewels, they are also a propounder of Buddhist philosophy.
지자 되게 상비리 tel야 안 류가 넘겨 쳐야다 안 샬레 판여 간의 용구도 제신 엠비리 tel야 안 류가게 넘겨 간 여반의 대가리 되게 샬라 판여 간의 용구도 제 삼다 되네자다 셈 삼롱 안바 주변나 지소라 내비게 내가 막보시리 예래다 상비리기나 지소라 내비게 메뉴바지 팬비리 막보 용구여바 도치 심주제 대소양 간주게 삼론나 가르스리기도 있는데 담보 아니 제변에 콩로 사이도 콩로 담보 가르스리기도 있는데 딩이 나세 담보 호랑 나세베 나지미 나라시 나세 삼로치고 되네 디네 뇌이 세데 뇌 분자 뇌 잘라 세데 나유와 쯤베게 안 데라 이제 디기 아니 뇌 잘라 쳐라 다샤 뇌 분자라 뇌송 제상 뇌 모자 쳐라 다샤 뇌 아니 네 가소레 따월이야 그 가고 자기도선 되는 아주 봐 코로나 코르기고 그래서 두 전에 삼다에 된제베나 또 심주체야지 제야지 삼다에 다진 것도 두 전에 기시야 드링이 기시야 드려 지난 나자로 시네 나보 나자도 벤 잘라 약고 주변 콘솔레데 요마된 콘솔데 잘라된 아야 이 모터 야요선 비 나자 주요베나 딩아야데 간슬레송 소 제바지도 담보코라 나 세디 나 세가 삼로치리고래 지사 디사 되는 뇌이세 삼레 되는 뇌 모터 세 삼레 뇌 모터데 되네 콘솔 잔달다도 말 소속이 되죠 야가톤데 콘솔레 미도 매장 뇌디 콘솔레 뇌디 야가래 샤스미 되네 나이가래야 콘솔레 야가주였으면 나 얘기해야 돼 두슬리기도와 지사도 진행한지 ya samdang dus chen jeba ina da dangbo zewi da nga jin de ya nga ra sing tu ba jimba de nga sia de ya ganis nangor se nga se dus nga se dus nga samta de nga se de so ya nga se yo sam ganis li nga zu pa lo de nga se de ne ye su bo da sem na ga ya ma yin ba chi ye ba chi na de go nangor ya ne su lo le nangor wa de ne ge na wa na xin jing de jin de ba ina di nga ra sing tu ba nga tempo tu ba be tin sin le go re che za da nyo mo ba ji ge za wa du re di re sha sa de du sin nga zo nga na tha de ka nang du si be du che ne sam da de nga zo di ring ge da ka sa da di ring yi she ba di ge da du che ba che de cha go no da de ne da wa ka da ge cha ye shi di nga zo yin wo jia luan ma go zu ru ba.
We'll summarize then what we've looked at this morning. So first, briefly recapped what we have been covering thus far, to really encourage one to keep looking at one's mind, being mindful, being aware of one's mental processes, and seeing what arises within oneself and classifying whether that is a wholesome way, a wholesome consciousness that has arisen, or an unwholesome one. And we've spoke again then about how to accurately classify. So one will hear that anger is unwholesome, for example, but one needs to see for oneself, is that the case? And the process, as we've heard, is one needs to see how it makes impacts on one's own mental state, what expression follows in terms of both speech and physical conduct, and whether that has and how that's received by others, either or both the person we're expressing it to or an observer, as well as society, and whether benefit or harm comes from this expression of this afflicted mind, and whether in future lives benefit or harm will follow. And so that's we first looked at, and this we've covered in quite some detail. Then started to look at where these afflicted minds come from. So it was mentioned that they come from the ignorance of self-grasping. So here I encourage you to now also to see whether this is the case or not. So if we take as an illustration, for example, the destructive emotion of anger, this comes from first having a sense of I. And when this I is threatened or harmed, we try to repulse what is threatening us. And this act of repulsion is this mind of anger, wanting to repulse harm to I, to me, to the self. Or, if it's something that we consider mine, my body, my possession, my group, then we only have the sense of mine because we have the sense of I. Following from a sense of I is the sense of mine. And then anger arises to protect what is mine. Similarly, with pride, this is the case for all afflictions, but this one needs to see for oneself, not just accept it from what one's hearing here. So to take pride as an illustration, we see pride arising, and it can arise in terms of our own qualities or our own possessions. And we think that my possessions, my good qualities, are something special. So here we can see the role of having a sense of I, then in relation to my good qualities, my possessions. And moreover, because there is a sense of I, there is therefore a sense of other, of what is not I. And here in the context of pride, we have our sense of I, the sense of mine towards our qualities, for example, and then the sense of other is to whom we express our condescension, looking down at them and so forth. So that was the second general topic we discussed, and then we looked at, in brief, the meditation. We looked further in the meditation. We need to see how the sense of I appears, and then see, does this self, the I, exist in the way that it appears or not? Is this appearance in accordance with reality? And the consciousness that grasps at this appearance, is it a consciousness that is grasping at this appearance, believing that it exists in the way that it appears? And is this correct or not? And we come to see here that this self-grasping is an ignorance, because it grasps at the self as existing in a way that it doesn't. So therefore it's not in accordance with reality. It is deluded. And it's this sense of confusion about reality that leads to all our suffering. Recognizing then that this is deluded, we look further, coming to see that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears. So it's empty of any sense of self-existence or natural existence or existing from its own side. And therefore it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this understanding is an understanding of emptiness, a wisdom understanding emptiness. And lastly, that doesn't mean though that the self doesn't exist at all. There is still a self, but this is not a self that exists in the way that it appears to our consciousness, but it's a self that is merely imputed by mind, merely labeled by mind onto our aggregates. So that's a summary of the 3 key points that we've looked at this morning. Then this afternoon we'll continue from here with looking at the 4 seals. If you have some questions, then we have a few minutes, so then please feel free to ask. Then at the back.
Sometimes I can get very angry when I hear news of, like cruelty to an animal or something, which doesn't personally affect me. So how does that relate to anger as a product of self-grasping?
So when I get angry at something like that doesn't directly affect me, so something in the news perhaps harm to an animal, that particular animal has no relation to me, and I'm getting angry at this. So how does this then relate to self-grasping?
So deba dida, so deba dida tungo mar pedi lega leda dida, so deba ni tungo mar, so deba da ma timba cha du, then draw go did. So deba dida tungo mar pedi lega leda dida.
It relates to one sense of self-grasping because, and this is a very common cause of anger, the person is not acting in accordance with one's own wishes. They're acting in a way contrary to one's own wishes. And from this, so many different illustrations of anger arise. Okay. Dorje?
When Geshe was saying about how does the I appear to us, and he said it seems to appear as a valid cognizer. And so I'm just wanting that to be teased out a little bit. I mean, a valid cognizer is very much the Buddhist term. It's not a Western term. So, that's the I is not a valid cognizer, but it is seen as a valid cognizer. So could you just tease that out a little bit, please?
Okay. So what I heard when Genla said how the I appears to us, it appears to us as a valid cognizer. So can Genla explain a little bit what is meant by a valid cognizer? Because the I is not a valid cognizer, so what is meant here?
Yeah, tease it out, yeah. Okay. It's not a valid cognizer, but it appears in the same sense that I is independent.
Okay.
But it's not independent.
So there's a question about the valid cognizer or the I being independent.
It's about the concept of the valid cognizer in relation to how we see the I.
Okay, so can Genla say a little bit about the valid cognizer in relation to how we see the I?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
간실에 간주도 세지 삼다도 영화서 나 세직 나도 삼다데 직 Nangbo ngadi kanis nangdu hago ya tu skale hago du si simju samta du samta si so nga sa de ji yuen yo kanis tu sempe samta na lol ya kanis nangdu ji du samta na phungbo da dine ka ya la ma de ba koran diwa ji ye de ba nanggo da di din na na xin ji yo ma da nga zo da ding wo ni phungbo da chen de de ba chi re ma do ka la ma ne ba na na xin yo ma de na do kanis nanggo so ji phungbo da 강라 마도 바로 능고를 가서 능고를 나타리 되는데 제가 디나와 나신 삼당원은 요래 삼바단을 로디 노트 채고르지 풍보라 마도 저 균이 메대용 그런 가가 주여 버리고 있는 거래지.
So just before I give Genna's answer, what you understood from earlier wasn't so close to what was said. So take this then as being correct, yeah? So the first point is, we need to see for ourselves. We need to see for ourselves how the I appears. And this is very difficult. It's the very first step in the meditation, and it's difficult for us because we always have the sense of I, but we're not aware of it. We have very little habituation, if any, to being aware of how our I appears to us. So this first step is crucial, but difficult. So the way that it appears is that it appears, our sense of I appears as if it is independent of our aggregate, so independent of our aggregate, of our physical body and our mind. It appears as if it's not impact, our body and our mind has no impact on our sense of self, that they are separate, that they are different, that there is not a relationship between the two. So that is how it appears. Whereas it's not how it exists, because rather the I is dependent on the aggregates. So then we'll leave it at that for now, but this will come up more in the future. And someone else at the end had a question, but we'll come to it later. The alarm has sounded.